In this lecture, we'll begin looking at color photography. So we'll be going back to the early days, as you can see here, 1850, and looking at some of the processes that made color photography possible. So the first process, the holotype, invented by Levi Hill, was essentially a daguerreotype, for the most part, the straightforward black and white photography, but he starts to play around with injecting dyes and pigments into the chemistry to achieve a photograph in color. Uh, there was a lot of skepticism uh, where many of his color photographs were tinted afterwards. So he did not really achieve a full color photographic process like we have today, but nonetheless, his early ideas and experimentation, basically, leading to refining the process a little more. So, discovered in 2007, this could be the first colored photograph. So it's kind of a toss-up between the Levi Hill photograph and this unknown photograph of the houses. And as you can see, it's not really a clear photograph, much like the very first photograph that was shown, where you could hardly even tell it was a photograph on it. Simply because these are not real archival processes at the time. So moving on to James Clerk Maxwell and the additive color process, which we're all pretty familiar with. Additive color it basically works on RGB, red, green, blue. So those of us pretty familiar with monitors and computers and displays and all of that, and projectors. That's the basic principle of the additive color process. You add these colors together to achieve a full color, the colors being red, green, blue. So James Clerk Maxwell came up with the idea of having three separate photographs with the different filters. So a red filter, green filter, blue filter in front of the camera as it's taking the pictures. And then you would take the three negatives, put them in essentially three different projectors, each one with a red, green, blue filter. And the projected image, once you got everything all nice and lined up, the projected image would be in full color. So not necessarily a printed out photograph that you could hold in your hands, but now we have the capability of creating images in color and showing them in color. Next, the Luis Ducos de Heron, his view of Egan. And if you notice around the edges of the photograph, like off to the left side, there's a little bit of blue. Down at the bottom, there's a little bit of red. And off to the right, there's some green. So for his process, again, it's sort of the same concept of photographing the same image three times with the three different colored filters, red, blue, green. And in his case, where he is playing around with the chemistry. I'm not sure if you remember when I talked about gum bichromate printing, where it's essentially, kind of black and white photography chemistry, but you're able to add different pigments to the chemistry. So basically, that's what he's working with, so that he takes the negative from the three different cameras and it does three different exposures with each time layering a different layer of emulsion, with the specific color, red, blue, or green. And essentially, this is the first full color photographic process. But as I was saying, you have to do each color layer individually. And it's much like when we did the cyanotypes, where it's UV light sensitive for this chemistry. Then Gabriel Lippmann. Part of his color, again, sort of the same thing, but one of the things he did was added a layer of mercury behind, kind of like the very bottom layer, and that helped to bounce light waves around. So again, with the different filters being applied, able to create a colored photograph, similar to the Huron that we just looked at. And then Prokudin Gorsky. So he came up with ideas of projecting color images, like the Maxwell. So one of the things he does is he basically retools the camera and the film back. So the film back that you can see there, the big crazy long vertical piece, so that essentially that you can take the three different exposures, and basically had kind of a built-in filter. So you set up your camera, focus it, put the special film back on there, take one picture, move it to the next, so that instead of having to have three separate cameras, now you can do all the color separations with one camera, so that the film back would have three sheets of film, and like I said, the three different filters. So when you shoot it, you're shooting through the red, you're shooting through the green, you're shooting through the blue, all in one camera. You're not having to have three separate cameras and hoping that everything lines up again. And then the other thing is having a projector, which you can see. And again, kind of hard to see on the front of the projectors, where they have the different filters, and they're also kind of a preset, so that you put in your three different negatives shot through the different filters, apply the specific filter to each lens. So it's basically projecting the three images at one time, and you just simply kind of line everything up to project your color photograph. So in a way, he's kind of streamlining the process so that you only have to use one specific piece of equipment. Whereas the Maxwell, that process, you had 3 different cameras. You need to have 3 different projectors. This way he's just streamlining it to where you just have one camera with the sliding film back, and in this case, a projector with 3 different lenses and 3 different negative holders. You can just put everything together in one piece of equipment. So here's a shot of what the 3 different negatives would kind of look like, each one having sort of specific details that the other one doesn't have. Plus, you're filtering out everything except for red, filtering everything else except for green, and blue. The filters there, that's what when I was talking about the color separation. You're separating out except for these specific colors. So that's what the negatives would look like. And then, once in the projector and you're projecting the image, you achieve, a little more kind of natural looking color. Whereas, the other ones were, you could tell that something different was about the process, and the colors didn't look quite right. But sort of this process and everything, that he refines it for a better, cleaner image. So just some more examples of his photographs. So this one, you can kind of tell their clothing and sort of their skin color, a little bit off in a way, but much closer than some of the other processes. So his photographs, around Russia, basically, where he was working and photographing. And then Leo Tolstoy, basically like a Russian writer, philosopher type. I don't know if you remember early on, there was the big sort of argument of photography being like a devil's creation, or something along that lines, where a lot of the philosophical types of the 19th century were very skeptical about photography and photography's role in the world and all of that. So Leo Tolstoy is kind of the same thing, with just like the Russian version of a couple of the ones that we talked about early on in the class. And so, basically, by this time, photography is accepted and all of that. So they would question, now color photography. So Tolstoy is kind of, questioning the invention, the use of color photography, and that there's always the thing, for color, you capture the likeness of someone. Black and white is where you capture the soul, or you capture the essence. So basically, he was really skeptical about color. And finally, when the technique was refined, he allowed himself to be photographed so that he would appear in true, vivid color, and not some crazy off color, really unnatural looking type thing, like the Hill photographs. And so Autochrome by the Lumiere brothers. So again, it's a way to streamline the process, so that essentially, now with Autochrome, now we're getting to all the different pigments and dyes and all that stuff mixed in with the photographic emulsion, so that everything's on one negative, or one sheet of photographic material. So you can kind of see it's today we would say pixelated. Get into photography terms, it's very grainy. But if you look at the grain there, you can see all the different little colors. Like I said, there's a real close-up detail of the photograph, so it's like you can see all the different little bits and pieces of color, pigments and stuff that are on the film there. So part of that whole idea comes from a painting done by Seurat, George Seurat, one of the post-impressionist painters. He, mathematician turned artist, and his paintings, where I say it's basically like a painting that is not really there, because if you think about what makes up green, what two colors make up green, what two colors make up orange. So that basically he's doing all these little points, all these little dots of individual colors. And so if you get, really close up to the image, you just see all these little dots. You start to back away, and at a certain point, your eye blends and mixes those together, so that all these little blue dots next to all these little yellow dots, and they're all, mixed in together. Close up, you just see blue dots, yellow dots. You back away, you see green. So that's why I say, he creates his painting that technically isn't there, because he's painting with these pure areas of color, and then your eye, your brain, naturally mixes them together. So the Lumiere brothers, that's what basically they're working with. So here's kind of a close-up of one of their images. So again, everything comes down to RGB color. And so one of their early photographs. So now we're getting into actual color photography, where again, streamlining the process. You just have one negative and one printout. You don't have to worry about projecting these different negatives and having three different negatives, and having to project the negatives and lining everything up. Now we're getting into just one negative, one color photograph. Then finally, National Geographic, a while back, exploring these early photographic processes. It's a photograph by Bernard Williams, and just a throwback to the early process, basically. Said if you're really taken by the cyanotype, you can look up alternative photo processes, and gum bichromate was one of the early ways to do color photography. But like I said, you have to do like 3 exposures, and you have to have 3 different color separated negatives. So that is it for this first lecture, essentially covering all the different processes. The next lecture we will look at some of the photographers that work in color.